Hello and welcome to another screencast. I'm providing this screencast for you to give you some insights or some flexibility about where do you find source materials on philosophical ideas. There's always an assumption when one's taken a course like this that one has to go to dry and rather abstract philosophical writings in order to get information. And a lot of these can be overwhelming, and frankly, I'm like you, some of them aren't very practically oriented, so I'm going to show you some alternative approaches to finding sources of information so that you can use them possibly for some assignments, or at least to get some more information and to get some more interest in life. Now, here are 4 ideas that I like. I'm going to talk about idealism and the doctrine of Christian Science. I'm going to talk about realism in 19th century art. I'm going to talk a little bit about finding existentialism sources in films and theater. And then I want to talk briefly about 2 examples of practical philosophies that can be found in education, so you can get some idea, and then you can expand on these ideas for your own benefit. So let's go on to the first idea, which is idealism. Okay, now, idealism sometimes is a kind of viewed as an abstract idea, and sometimes I've had students say, well, where are some practical examples of idealism in operation today? And I'm providing you with one concrete example. Christian Science is a Protestant denomination that was founded in the United States in the mid-19th century by a person by the name of Mary Baker Eddy, and frequently Christian Science is the denomination, or it's the idea that frequently is aligned in when we talk about the idea of mind over matter. And the reason this is so, and I'm going to highlight this so you can make sure this emphasized, is that although this is not exactly like totally strict, many Christian scientists look to alternative methods of healing before they go to medicine for various kinds of ills and ailments. So there are within the Christian Science denomination guidelines for reading and for meditation that are intended to encourage people to heal themselves without the use of what we would kind of affirm as traditional medicine. So again, the idea, and again, I'll go back to the idea of the concept of mind over matter, is very much, because if you read about idealism, we know that the essence of idealism is that the idea comes first. So rather than the idea coming from practical experience, in idealism, the idea is the origin of the experience that follows. So basically, this would be one example, and I've given you the website for the Christian Science denomination. They have a very large worldwide facility in Boston, Massachusetts. I've been there by it. It's a very interesting architectural thing, and it's a rather substantial program, because I don't know the exact number of people who are affiliated with the Christian Science denomination, but they do number in substantial numbers. I know that in the Wichita area, for example, there are at least 2 Christian Science reading rooms, or churches, as you might term them, and maybe more. So that's one example of a place where you could go to get a practical example of how a philosophical concept is actually playing out in modern day society. Let's move on. One of my favorites is to talk about the concept of realism. Now, again, think in terms of realism, because when we talk about realism, we talk about experience is the first, experience starts first and the ideas come from experience. Well, transfer that into the concept of art and get a picture of what that might be. So realism is a style of art that demands details. In other words, one of the clues of realism would be that you would look at the work of art and you'd say, by golly, I know what that is. So it contrasts this with two other schools of thought in art, one which is abstraction. And abstraction is, of course, the idea that in the artwork, you don't see a direct, literal view of what the artwork is picturing as you would if you're doing a photograph. Realism in art would look very much like a photograph of the work. Abstraction wouldn't. And there are different levels of abstraction, we won't go there. Or Impressionism, which is another version of art which talks about the idea of enhancing what you really see because the eye is picking up something else. It's a little more complex. So, but realism, and here are three examples of artists who are practitioners of realism. Gustave Courbet is a French artist, mid-19th century, and sometimes if you go to a website and find his work, you will see very large-scale historical scenes. So you would look at one of his huge canvases and you would say, aha, this is a picture of the surrender of Napoleon, or this is a picture of, and you could name a specific event that it would be related to, and it would be, it's sometimes fanciful, sometimes he might include people that weren't really there, but you would see and you would look at the picture and you'd say, aha, I got an inkling of what that is. Another one would be another French artist by the name of Edouard Manet, again, another 19th century artist. And his big contribution was the idea of picturing people in real life settings. So rather than having wealthy people posing for photographs, you might see a tavern scene, or you might see a scene on a village green where you'd see people doing something, perhaps playing a game, probably perhaps having a glass of ale or a glass of wine, but you would clearly see what the setting was, you would clearly see what they were doing, you would recognize the faces of the people, you'd look at the expressions on the people's face and you'd say, aha, I kind of know what that person's thinking. Very realistic. And finally, John Sargent, frequently called John Singer Sargent, to get his full name in there, who was noted for a person on exacting details. And I'm going to give you a picture of this right now. This is a very famous piece of work by John Sargent, and it's called Madam X. And now, here's what's realistic about it. The details of the woman's hairstyle, the gown, the low-cut nature of the gown, the shoulder straps, the rendition of her physique, including her arms, her profile, are very exacting. He posed her many times, and this would be exactly what she would look like if you saw her posing for the picture. Now, and sometimes we think in terms of art that, well, realistic art probably isn't very controversial because it's picturing exactly what you see. This is not the case with this particular work. This was very controversial because simply women of society in the 19th century did not pose this way. You didn't see this, so it was a very controversial. But it's realism because you would look at it, and if you were in the period of that painting, and we do know this, we know exactly the name of the person who is Madam X. And her friends at that time actually knew that she posed for the picture, which was part of the scandal, because they could recognize the details, what she looked like very clearly. So again, realism in art. This is a second thing. So in other words, you can actually go to an art museum and get a pretty good idea of an example of realism, which is very close to what we think in terms of realism as a philosophical construct. Let's move on. Existentialism is one that I like, and it's one that is really fun to research because all you got to do is you've got to go to the theater or you've got to go see some films. Now briefly, what do we know about existentialism? And this is very brief. If you read and report on existentialism for one of your papers, I hope you're more complete with this, but here are three things. Existence precedes essence. In other words, existentialism is concerned with the event of the moment. What's actually happening is key to the process of existentialism. Secondly, absurd things happen. Well, in our generation, since we're a little more crass with our language, we frequently use it as we pick a four-letter word and we say blank happens. So I'm simply using, but yeah, unexpected things happen, things that happen accidentally. They're not going to be planned with. But, and here's the big thing about existentialism that you will find here, is what we call authenticity. Things happen, the absurd things happen, unusual, unexpected things happen, but in life, you gotta live with it. So you don't have a choice of saying, I don't want to take this hand that's being dealt to me. Here are some examples of films that you can see, and they're available. Now, some of these are, I'll just list a list. Monty Python, English humor of the 1970s, Monty Python's Flying Circus, noted for really unusual, weird situations. Here's an example. If you've not, if you youngsters have not actually rented one of these movies or gotten them on streaming video, Taxi Driver with Robert De Niro, 1970s, 1980s, High Noon with Gary Cooper, earlier than that, are great examples of existentialism. In High Noon, it's called High Noon because a guy has gotten out of prison. He's going to come back and he's going to try to kill this guy, played by Gary Cooper, who wants to retire as a sheriff in this little town. And everybody says, well, that's your problem, but we can't help you. So it's kind of absurd in that sense. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, again, a classic movie, Jack Nicholson. The plot is that Jack Nicholson and other characters are in an asylum, and the film actually comes out with the idea that the crazies are the people that are on the outside, the people that are sane are the people on the inside. And then a filmmaker is still active, Woody Allen. Any Woody Allen film is existentialism. The characters start something, they may have some plot, and then something unusual, unexpected happens. It always is the case, and then that's the existentialist part of the absurd happens, and they have to live with it. Theater of the Absurd, probably the most famous. If you've never seen it, we used to read it in literature in high school. They probably don't anymore. Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, all about a conversation between two people waiting for a person, Godot, who never arrives. That's kind of an example of the absurd. So again, you can go to many films, you can go to theater, also in literature, and you can see lots of examples of existentialism. If you want more ideas, I won't dwell on them right now, but I can be glad to provide you, because I want to go on and finish this last idea kind of quickly. And this is, one thing we find, particularly in education, is there are a lot of practical philosophies where the philosophy flows from behavior. Montessori is an example of that. Marie Montessori did not think philosophical construct of Montessorism first. She thought of an effective way to teach early children. So that's where she started. The philosophy came from the practice. Suzuki early childhood, the mother tongue concept, again, came from the idea of Dr. Suzuki, who was looking for something that he thought would be effective in working with children. And then the philosophy flows from that. Again, I've given you the website so you can check those out. So in brief, I've given you 4 concepts where you could actually go away from traditional philosophical writings and find some great source materials for papers that you might write. I hope you do this. It would make your life a little more interesting. Bye-bye for now.